There's a moment in life when everything changes. Not gradually, not over time, but in one single moment. That moment came on a Sunday afternoon in late October when a beat-up sedan, rusted at the edges and held together by prayers and duct tape, pulled up to a massive brick colonial house in the suburbs. The car was so worn that you could barely tell what color it was supposed to be. The tires were bald. The windshield had a crack running down the passenger side, and the man who stepped out of the vehicle was wearing clothes that looked like they had been dragged behind the car for the last 300 miles. My precious family, thank you so much for being here with me today. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and mark your presence in the comments below by telling me what time it is, where you are, and what country you're watching from. This helps me know my beautiful family from all around the world. Now, let me tell you a story that will shake you to your core. A story about a man who thought he knew everything about his family only to discover that he knew nothing about himself. His name was Terrence Hunter, and what nobody knew at that moment, what nobody could have possibly suspected as they watched him shuffle up the driveway in wrinkled car keys and a shirt with stains that refused to come out, was that Terrence Hunter was a billionaire, not a millionaire, not someone with a comfortable nest egg, a billionaire. He had spent the last 15 years in Seattle, building a technology empire from absolutely nothing, climbing his way from poverty to unimaginable wealth. He flew in private jets. He owned multiple properties. He made more money in a day than most people made in a lifetime. His net worth was so substantial that financial advisors had entire teams dedicated just to managing his portfolio. But on this particular Sunday, Terrence Hunter looked like a man who didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. The thing about Terrence was that he had always felt something missing. Even at the height of his success, he had the money, the status, the accolades. Every business deal he touched seemed to turn to gold. Investors fought over the chance to work with him. Tech magazines ran feature stories about him. He was living the American dream. But underneath all of that success, beneath the designer suits and the penthouses and the invitations to exclusive events, Terrence felt profoundly alone, and he had come to believe that this loneliness wasn't accidental. He believed his family back. Home, the people he had left behind when he chased his dreams to Seattle, had only ever loved him for what he could do for them. They had never loved him for who he was. So he had devised a plan. It was a plan born from doubt, nurtured by suspicion, and executed with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years learning how to strategize and manipulate markets. He would come home unannounced, but not as himself. He would come home as a failure. He would come home and tell them that the lawsuit had taken everything. The house was foreclosed. The business had collapsed. He was bankrupt, and he would watch how they treated him when he had nothing left to give them. It was a test that would finally reveal the truth about who in his family actually loved him, and who only loved what he could provide. What Terrence didn't know, as he stood in that driveway, looking up at the massive house where his family was gathering for Sunday dinner, was that this test would become the most important examination he would ever take. But not in the way he expected. The front door opened before he could knock. His mother, Gloria Hunter, stood in the doorway. She was in her mid-70s now, her hair gray and styled in the way she had worn it for decades. Her dress a soft floral pattern, her eyes the same warm brown they had always been. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across her face, a recognition, a knowing. But it passed so quickly that Terrence almost missed it. She pulled him into a hug, held him for maybe 3 seconds longer than was normal, and then stepped back. "Come on in, baby," she said, her voice warm but measured. "Everyone's here." The house smelled like it always did on Sunday dinner days. The aroma of collarded greens seasoned just right. fried chicken with skin so crispy it shattered when you bit into it, cornbread that was still warm from the oven, sweet potato pie that made your mouth water just thinking about it. It was the smell of family. It was the smell of home. But as Terrence crossed the threshold, he felt his stomach tighten. He knew what was coming. He had rehearsed it 100 times in his mind. The dining room was full. His 2 older sisters, Sandra Bryant and Valerie Townsend, were already seated at the table, their designer bags placed carefully on chairs behind them. Sandra wore a Chanel suit, even though it was just family dinner. Valerie's nails were freshly manicured, her jewelry expensive and carefully chosen. They had done well for themselves in their own ways. Sandra was a hospital administrator, always climbing the ladder, always thinking about the next promotion. Valerie ran a luxury event planning business, which meant she was always connected to high society, always thinking about the next gala or charity function. They looked up as Terrence entered, and their smiles froze on their faces. "Terrence," Sandra said, standing up. "We didn't know you were coming home." "I didn't either," he said quietly, and those words were the most honest thing he would say all evening. He hadn't planned to feel this strange, this disconnected from himself. "I need to tell you all something." His mother sat down at the head of the table. His aunts and uncles, who had been helping in the kitchen, began to file into the dining room. His brother Gregory, who had just arrived through the back door with dirt still under his fingernails from the landscaping job he had been working on all day, came in and stopped when he saw Terrence. Unlike the others, Gregory didn't freeze. He smiled widely, genuinely happy to see his younger brother. "Yo, Terrence, man," Gregory called out, moving forward to embrace him. But then he pulled back, studying Terrence's face. "Man, what's wrong? You look like someone died." Terrence took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this moment so many times that he had thought it would be easy. But standing here, surrounded by the people he had grown up with, the people who had known him his whole life, it was harder than he expected. "I lost everything," he said simply. "There was a lawsuit, a big one. The company was named in a case I didn't see coming. By the time my lawyers were done fighting it, by the time everything was settled, the house was gone. It's all gone. The business, the investments, everything. I'm bankrupt, and I need to crash somewhere for a few months while I figure out how to rebuild." The room went silent. Not a thoughtful silence, not a sympathetic silence, a cold, heavy silence that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the room and replace it with something else, something harder. Sandra set down her fork carefully. She looked at her hands for a moment before speaking. "That's terrible, Terrence. Really terrible. But I don't know if I can help you with this right now. My house is so crowded with all the renovation work we're doing, and honestly, the contractors are in and out at all hours. It would be really disruptive." "It would only be for a few months," Terrence said, already knowing what was coming. Valerie cleared her throat. She had always been the one more concerned with appearances, more worried about what other people thought. "The situation is complicated for me as well," she said, her voice carefully polite in a way that made it clear she was completely indifferent to his suffering. "I'm hosting the Metropolitan Charity Gala next month. It's a very high-profile event, and I have clients flying in, staying at hotels, working with me on the final details. Having you here during that time would really ruin the aesthetic we've been cultivating. I'm sure you understand." Ruin the aesthetic. Those were the words that hung in the air. Not, "I'm sorry to hear you're going through this." Not, "How can I help?" But it would ruin the aesthetic. Gloria watched from her place at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Terrence looked at his mother, searching for something, some sign that she felt for him, that she understood what this rejection meant. But she just looked back at him, her eyes warm but distant, and said nothing. The aunts and uncles made excuses. They had small homes. They had their own problems. One of his uncles, Morris Coleman, mumbled something about having just taken in his sister and not having any extra room. The words all blended together into one long rejection, one long chorus of, "No, we can't help you." The dining room that had smelled like love and family just minutes earlier now felt cold. The food on the table, which had looked so appetizing, now looked obscene. Here were people eating elaborate meals while their son, their brother, their nephew stood in front of them in worn-out clothes asking for help. And every single one of them said no. Every single one of them except Gregory. Gregory waited until the other family members had finished making their excuses, until the room had returned to that terrible silence. Then he stood up and walked over to Terrence. He placed his hand on his brother's shoulder and looked him in the eye. "Man, I don't care about the money," Gregory said, and his voice was steady and sure. "I never cared about all that. You know me. I run a small landscaping business. I'm not trying to be a billionaire or a CEO or any of that. I just want to live my life and be good to the people I love. And I love you, man. You're my brother. You come work with me on the trucks. We'll get you back on your feet, and you can stay with me as long as you need. My house is your house." It was in that moment that Terrence felt something shift inside him. All the cynicism, all the doubt, all the suspicion that he had been carrying with him for so long seemed to crack just a little. Maybe there was one good person in this family. Maybe after all this time, after all these years of believing that everyone around him was motivated only by greed and selfishness, there was one person who actually loved him for who he was, not what he had. Gregory hugged him, and for the first time since Terrence had arrived home, he felt like he could breathe again. The next morning, Terrence woke up in Gregory's spare room. It was a small, clean room with simple furniture and pale green walls. There was a window that looked out onto the street, and through it, Terrence could see the neighborhood where Gregory lived. It was modest, not poor, but not wealthy either. Just a normal everyday neighborhood where normal everyday people lived their lives. Terrence looked around the room and thought about how he had spent the last 15 years chasing things, accumulating things, believing that more was always better. And yet here in this simple room, with nothing but the clothes on, his back, and the gratitude in his heart for a brother who had shown him true kindness, he felt more at peace than he had in a very long time. Gregory had left early to get to a job, but he had left a note on the kitchen table explaining that Terrence should make himself at home, that there was food in the refrigerator, and that he would come pick Terrence up at noon to take him to meet his crew. The landscaping business was small but successful. Gregory employed about 5 guys who did everything from lawn maintenance to small-scale landscape design. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and Terrence found himself looking forward to doing something real, something tangible, something that didn't involve boardrooms or conference calls or dealing with investors who wanted quarterly projections. When Gregory picked him up, he brought Terrence along in his truck to a job they were working on across town. Terrence spent the day raking leaves, trimming hedges, and hauling mulch. His hands, which had never done anything more strenuous than sign documents, became blistered. His back, which had been tight from years of sitting in executive chairs, began to ache. And he loved every single second of it. There was something pure about physical work, something honest about laboring for a wage, something genuinely satisfying about looking at a yard when you were done and seeing the tangible results of your effort. Over the next few weeks, Terrence settled into a routine. He woke up early, worked with Gregory's crew all day, and in the evenings, he and Gregory would sit on the porch and talk about life. Gregory told him about the challenges of running a small business, about his dreams and his fears, about the girl he was seeing who worked at the local coffee shop. Terrence listened and offered advice when it seemed appropriate, but mostly he just listened. And with each passing day, he felt more and more like he had found something real in his life. He had found truth. He had found authenticity. He had found a family member who actually cared about him. Or so he thought. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after Terrence had arrived home, that everything changed again. Terrence had been in the back of Gregory's truck looking for a specific shovel when his hand brushed against something that wasn't supposed to be there. It was a leather-bound ledger tucked behind a loose panel in the truck bed, hidden in a way that suggested it was meant to be kept secret. Terrence knew he shouldn't look. He knew that opening that ledger would be a violation of his brother's privacy, but he did it anyway. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. The ledger was filled with names, addresses, and amounts of money. But these weren't the records of a landscaping business. These were the records of something far more sinister. Terrence recognized the pattern immediately. He had studied enough business practices to know a predatory scheme when he saw one. The addresses were all in the neighborhood where his parents lived. The names were the names of elderly homeowners, people on fixed incomes, people who had lived in that neighborhood for decades. And the amounts of money listed next to their names were offers that were far below market value, offers that would have allowed Gregory and whoever he was working with to buy up an entire neighborhood at a fraction of what the land was actually worth. Terrence's mind raced as he flipped through the pages. There were notes in the margins, plans for how to approach these homeowners, details about their financial situations gathered through what must have been weeks of research, references to something called a silent partnership with a real estate development firm. There were even photographs of some of the homes marked up with plans for how they would be demolished and replaced with new construction. His parents' home was in this ledger. Their names were listed with an offer amount that was literally half of what their house was worth. Terrence heard Gregory's truck pulling back up to the job site. He quickly put the ledger back, exactly where he had found it, covering it with the loose panel again. His hands were shaking. His mind was reeling. For 3 weeks, he had believed that his brother was the one good person in his family, the one person who actually loved him. And now he realized that Gregory's kindness had never been about love at all. It had been about strategy. It had been about access. Gregory had thought that by taking in his supposedly bankrupt brother, he would gain the trust of someone he viewed as having technical expertise, someone whose secrets might be useful to a predatory real estate scheme. That evening, when Gregory came to pick him up, Terrence felt like he was looking at a stranger. Gregory was chatting away as usual, talking about the girl at the coffee shop, about a job they had lined up for the following week, about whether they should grab some food on the way home. Terrence made appropriate responses, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his parents, about how they were about to lose their home to a scheme that his own brother had orchestrated. He was thinking about all the other people in that ledger, all the other families who would be displaced because of his brother's greed. That night, Terrence lay in the spare room and made a decision. He was going to end this. He was going to reveal who he was, show his family his bank account, and let them see the full extent of their greed. But he wasn't going to give them anything. He wasn't going to write checks, or save his parents' home, or bail anyone out. He was going to leave them with the truth. And the truth would be far more valuable than money could ever be. The truth would force them to confront themselves. The truth would show them exactly what kind of people they had become. He called his mother the next day and told her to arrange a family meeting at a local diner for the following Sunday evening. She seemed surprised, but didn't ask many questions. Gloria Hunter was not a woman who asked many questions. She simply said that she would let everyone know and that they would meet him at 7. The week seemed to stretch on forever. Terrence continued to go to work with Gregory, maintaining the lie, pretending that everything was normal, but his mind was already gone. He was already thinking about what he was going to say, how he was going to reveal their true natures to them, how he was going to walk away from all of them forever. He had come home looking for truth, looking for evidence that his family loved him. Instead, he had found deception so deep, so pervasive, that it had infected everything. His sisters loved money and status. His brother loved himself and his schemes and the rest of his family. They had shown their true colors by their silence and their rejection. By Sunday evening, Terrence felt like a man on his way to an execution. He wore clothes he had bought with cash, clothes that fit him properly for the first time in weeks. He drove himself to the diner in a rental car, a standard sedan that was neither impressive nor pitiful. He sat in a booth and waited for his family to arrive. They came in slowly, trickling through the door. Sandra in her designer outfit, Valerie with her perfectly styled hair, Gregory looking confused about why he was here. Various aunts and uncles, cousins, and other family members filled the booth and the ones surrounding it. His mother was the last to arrive. She sat directly across from Terrence and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Well," Sandra said, breaking the silence, "you wanted to tell us something." Terrence opened his mouth to speak. He had practiced this moment 1,000 times. He was ready to reveal the bank statements, the investment portfolio, the real estate holdings. He was ready to tell them that they had failed his test, that they had revealed themselves to be exactly what he had suspected. He was ready to tell them all to go to hell. But his mother held up her hand. "Before you speak," Gloria said, quietly, "I need to say something." Terrence closed his mouth. He looked at his mother, waiting. Gloria took a deep breath. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member. Then she looked back at Terrence. "I know you're a billionaire," she said. "I've known for the last 5 years." The booth went silent. Completely, utterly silent. Everyone froze. "I know about your company in Seattle," Gloria continued, her voice steady and clear. "I've been following your career. I've read the articles about you in Forbes and TechCrunch. I watched you climb from nothing to the top of the technology world, and I did nothing to stop you." Terrence felt the room tilt slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, but his mother held up her hand again. "I deliberately let this family treat you the way they did," Gloria said. "I let you feel rejected. I let you feel unloved. I let you come home and test us, because I needed you to understand something. I needed you to finally understand that your obsession with testing people's loyalty is the exact reason you're so lonely. You came home with a lie, Terrence, and you invited the very behavior you were afraid of. You wanted to catch people in their greed, so you created a scenario where greed would flourish. You can't go through life setting traps for people and then act surprised when they fall into them." Terrence felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. He didn't understand. He didn't understand any of this. "There's something else," Gloria said. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Valerie started to say something, but Gloria silenced her with a look. 15 years ago, when you told me you were going to move to Seattle to start a company, I thought about stopping you. I thought about telling you it was too risky, that you should stay here where it was safe. But I didn't. Instead, I did something else. Do you remember that we lost your father 5 years before that? Do you remember the life insurance policy he left?" Terrence nodded slowly. His father had died when Terrence was just 10 years old. The life insurance had been enough to help the family get by, but not enough to change their lives. "I took that money," Gloria said, "every penny of it, and I invested it through an anonymous angel investor group in your first startup. I was the one who believed in you before you believed in yourself. I was the one who took the risk on you. You thought you were self-made, Terrence. You thought you had built your empire from nothing, but I had already sacrificed everything for you. I had already made the biggest investment of my life in your success." Terrence felt something break inside him. He felt the entire narrative of his life, the story he had been telling himself for 15 years, crumble into dust. "You came home to judge a family you thought was greedy," Gloria continued, her voice soft but firm. "But what you found is that you were the greedy one. You were so focused on what everyone could do for you, so focused on testing whether people's love was real that you never stopped to consider what had already been sacrificed for you. You never stopped to consider that perhaps the people who love you most are the ones who do it in silence, who believe in you when you don't believe in yourself, who give everything and ask for nothing in return." She released his hand and sat back in her chair. "I let your sisters reject you because I needed you to understand that rejection exists. I let your brother deceive you because I needed you to understand that people can be corrupt, even the ones closest to you. I let you suffer because I needed you to finally understand that true character isn't just how people treat the poor. True character is how the wealthy choose to honor the truth." The other family members began to react, to defend themselves, to explain. But Terrence barely heard them. He was sitting alone in his own mind, watching the entire foundation of his understanding crumble away. He had come home to reveal the truth about his family. Instead, he had been revealed. He had come home to judge them. Instead, he had been judged, and the worst part, the part that cut deepest, was that his mother was right. Every word she had spoken was the absolute truth. Terrence sat in that diner for another 10 minutes, but he didn't speak. He listened to his sisters try to explain to his brother, frantically deny the accusations that hadn't even been made yet, to his mother's continued calm explanation of why she had orchestrated this entire scenario. And with each word, with each explanation, Terrence felt more and more like a fool. He had spent 15 years building an empire, and in doing so, he had built the walls of a prison around himself. He had been so focused on proving that he didn't need anyone, that he could make it on his own, that he had failed to see that the greatest gift he had ever received had been given to him by someone who expected nothing in return. When the conversation began to wind down, when it became clear that there was nothing left to say, Terrence stood up. He looked at each member of his family one by one. He didn't speak. He just looked at them. And then he walked out of that diner and never went back. He didn't write a check to save his parents' home. He, Clear's throat, didn't invest in his sister's businesses. He didn't use his resources to build up his family or to help them in any way. Instead, he left them with what his mother had said, what they could have had all along if they had just been honest, if they had just loved him for who he was rather than what he could give them. He left them with the truth, and the truth, as it turned out, was a far more powerful thing than money could ever be. What Terrence learned in that moment, sitting in a diner, surrounded by the people who had raised him, was that if you spend your life looking for reasons to distrust people, you will always find them. You will find them even if you have to create the lies yourself in order to make them appear. You will create scenarios designed to expose the worst in human nature, and human nature being what it is, will comply. People will fall into the traps you set not because they were always greedy or corrupt, but because you gave them the opportunity to be. And sometimes, faced with that opportunity, people will take it. But the inverse of that is also true. If you spend your life looking for reasons to trust people, you will find those too. You will find them in the small gestures, in the sacrifices made in silence, in the people who love you, not despite your flaws, but because they have seen your potential and decided to invest in it anyway. Terrence Hunter left Seattle with the understanding that true character isn't just how people treat the poor, it's how the wealthy choose to honor the truth. It's how people treat you when you have nothing, yes, but also how they treat you when you have everything and they know it. It's whether they are the same person in private as they are in public. It's whether they love you for you or whether they love you for what you can do for them. He didn't go back to live in Seattle. He didn't go back to his empire of technology and power and endless accumulation. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He started giving it away, not to his family, but to strangers, to people who had no ability to repay him, no way to give him anything in return. He funded startups run by people from disadvantaged backgrounds. He created scholarship programs for underprivileged youth. He invested in communities that had been left behind by the progress of the modern world. He built a life based not on what he could accumulate, but on what he could give. It didn't fix his relationship with his family. His sisters remained obsessed with status and money. His brother, once his corruption was exposed, faced legal consequences for his involvement in the predatory real estate scheme. His mother, the woman who had orchestrated this entire lesson, became less of a villain and more of a complicated figure in his life. She had done something cruel in order to teach him something true. Whether that made her good or bad, Terrence never quite decided. But what Terrence did know was that he could never go back to the way things had been. He could never look at people the same way again. He could never approach relationships from a place of suspicion and testing, because he had learned in the most painful way possible that when you go looking for betrayal, you will find it. And when you go looking for greed, you will create it. The real tragedy of Terrence's story isn't that his family was greedy. It's that a man with everything decided to test people instead of trusting them. It's that he came home looking for proof that the people around him were selfish, and in doing so, he almost became the thing he was looking for. Years later, long after he had given away most of his wealth, long after he had built a life based on service rather than accumulation, Terrence would occasionally think about that diner. He would think about his mother's words, about how true character is revealed, not in how you treat the poor, but in how you treat the truth. And he would realize that his mother had given him the greatest gift of all. She had given him the gift of knowing who he was and who he wanted to be. She had held up a mirror and forced him to look at himself, not the version he wanted to be, but the version he actually was. And sometimes that truth is harder to face than any amount of rejection or deception. This is a story about a billionaire, yes, but it's also a story about all of us. It's a story about the lies we tell ourselves. It's a story about the ways we test the people around us, looking for proof that they don't deserve our love, our trust, our vulnerability. It's a story about how loneliness breeds distrust, and how distrust breeds more loneliness in an endless cycle. But it's also a story about redemption. It's a story about a man who realized that the greatest wealth he could ever have wasn't in his bank account or his investment portfolio. It was in the moment when he finally understood that the woman who loved him most had already proven it by sacrificing everything for him. Not because he had earned it, not because he deserved it, but simply because that's what mothers do. They love their children even when their children are fools. They believe in them even when they don't believe in themselves. They make sacrifices that they never expect to be repaid. As you sit here watching this story, I want you to think about the people in your own life. I want you to think about whether you're looking for reasons to trust them or reasons to distrust them. I want you to think about the times you've tested people either directly or indirectly and what those tests revealed. Did they reveal the truth about the other person, or did they reveal the truth about you? This is the kind of story that stays with you. This is the kind of story that makes you lie awake at night thinking about your own life, your own choices, your own relationships. This is the kind of story that makes you want to reach out to the people you love and tell them that you're sorry for not trusting them sooner. This is the kind of story that reminds us that sometimes the people we're most suspicious of are the ones who have already done the most for us. And now I want to ask you something. I want you to really think about this. In Terrence's position, what would you have done when you discovered that your brother was corrupt, when you realized that your entire test had been based on a lie, when your mother revealed that she had been manipulating you all along? What would you have done? Would you have given your family everything and forgiven them? Would you have cut them off completely? Would you have done exactly what Terrence did? Walked away without giving them anything but the truth? I want you to answer that question in the comments below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me whether you think Terrence was right to leave his family with nothing. Tell me whether you think his mother was right to orchestrate this entire scenario. Tell me what this story made you feel. Did it make you want to cry? Did it make you angry? Did it make you reflect on your own life? And while you're in the comments, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the other incredible stories we have for you. We upload new stories every single day, and we have over 30 different stories in our catalog, all of them exploring the complex nature of family, love, justice, and what it means to be human. My precious family, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Thank you for letting me into your hearts and your homes. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. I'll see you in the next story.